You're listening to the Shared Security Podcast with Tom Eston and Scott Wright, exploring the trust you put in people, apps, and technology.
Hosted by Scott Wright, the Streetwise security coach, and Tom Eston, penetration tester and ethical hacker. And sponsored by Security Perspectives, your source for tailored security awareness training and assessment solutions. We bring you stories, advice, and tips to help you make better risk decisions because nobody else can make them for you.
Episode 68, an interview with human hacker and modern-day superhero who finds bad guys and wraps them in a bow for law enforcement, Chris Hadnagy.
Hello and welcome to the Shared Security Podcast. I'm Scott Wright with Tom Eston, and today we have a special guest. Tom, what are we doing today?
Well, we'd like to welcome Chris Hadnagy to the podcast. Chris is a professional social engineer. He's also founder of socialengineer.org and the Innocent Lives Foundation. He's also a book author and host of the Social Engineer podcast. And today we're going to talk to Chris about his new organization, the Innocent Lives Foundation, as well as the topic of social engineering, which is always interesting. And welcome to the show, Chris.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Our pleasure, yeah.
So, what is the Innocent Lives Foundation? I've seen it. I've done my own research, but seen it in the media. I know this is a new project that you've been embarking on. Tell us a little bit about the foundation and what you're doing.
So it's really behind using the skilled talent that we have in this industry, which we have so much of, and using that talent to unmask anonymous online child predators, and then bring those names and those files to law enforcement contacts and have them brought to justice. And that's really the whole basis of the foundation is on that.
That's awesome. So where'd you get the idea for this and kind of how that gets started?
I had a couple jobs that I was doing for a corporate client, and those jobs led me down a path to where we actually, not looking for, but we uncovered someone who was trafficking children and molesting children and videotaping it and then selling those videos on the dark web. And using our SE skills and OSINT skills, we were able to uncover who that person was, and now they're sitting in prison. Another case where we were able to help an organization that was tracking a man who was trafficking children in from Asia into this country. We were able to locate his home address and also information about him to a depth that law enforcement was able to get involved, issue a warrant, and he's also sitting in prison. So these couple cases, what occurred was they ended up not only feeling really good that I was able to use these skills to help protect children, but I sat back and said, wow, this wasn't a job. Like, no one paid me to do this. I did this. And it was time consuming and, of course, mentally consuming. So I said, man, if we had a way to raise some money so I can hire quality people on a contract basis to help me do this work, we may be able to accomplish 10 times as much and 10 times less the time. And that idea kind of gave birth to what Innocent Lives Foundation is.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah. So how long have you guys been doing this, like, officially?
That's a funny question. So I launched it. This is how crazy this is. I almost have to pinch myself when I think about it. So I put my application in for 501c in June of this year. I launched it publicly July at DEF CON. And already, now it's the end of September, we have close to 300 volunteers.
Wow.
We've raised thousands of dollars of donations. We have contacts and communicates with 4 different major law enforcement agencies and 7 local law enforcement agencies. And we're, and our 501c3 came in approved from the IRS.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is a fast time. I mean, that's like unheard of, even with like a 501c3 usually takes, I've heard, a year or more. sometimes to get approved. So
I've been told it could take up to 6 months.
Yeah,
We had it back in less than 2 months. So I'm completely shocked. It seems like everything just kind of fell in line to make this work.
that's great. Really good. So one of the big questions I know Scott and I have, I'm sure our audience does, is, how do your volunteers, maintain their privacy, doing this type of work? Obviously, a lot of this work is, I'm sure, very, eye-opening for people, and is not something that maybe, people in this industry may not have been exposed to. So how is their anonymity kind of protected when they're working on these types of things?
Sure, that's a good question. I just want to make sure I am answering it properly. So when we talk about their privacy or the researchers remaining anonymous, you're talking about the bad guys, right?
Well, I'm talking about the volunteers that work to unmask these predators, doing this research.
Right, but you're talking about them remaining anonymous to the bad guys, not necessarily.
Correct.
Okay,
that's correct. Yep.
So one of the things that hit me early on is that, and there's actually some studies behind this, is that you really can't spend your days doing anything in the pornography space at all. You can't, without affecting your sense of morality or your psychology. And that amplifies when we talk about anything to do with children. So when I decided that I wanted to do something around this, I had to come up with a way that we can accomplish this task without having to spend hours and hours and hours a day sitting in the mire. Right, that was very important to me. So we are in the process, and it's being worked on now, in creating a VDI environment, so virtual desktop infrastructure environment. My good friend Dave Kennedy, he helped me with the whole concept behind it, and then in essence what we did is take that concept and build an infrastructure where things are like all images are blocked or blurred out. You can't cache things or download things. There's a lot of security protocols and protections in place to help keep the researchers safe, both psychologically but also physically and security-wise. And all work has to be done from this environment. And that environment is what is used to not only store, catalog, and log the work, but it's also is what's used to protect them and to give them some semblance of anonymity as well as security.
So all identities that are used in the operational side are basically controlled within that infrastructure and are just anonymously mapped to the investigators.
Correct. And I'm sorry, guys. Let me turn that off. Sorry about that. Hopefully this is getting edited, right?
Sure.
Okay. We'll go through with that. Oh, boy. Sorry about that.
No problem. Makes it real.
Yeah, it makes it really real because I just had that phone fail. I hate when that happens. Man, your question just left my head.
Just the idea that the identities of the investigators get mapped within that infrastructure into the anonymous or staged identities of the accounts that might be investigating people.
Yeah, that's 100% true. So what will not occur is that we don't have any workers that will not be known by law enforcement, right? So especially in this space, it's very important that people are vetted properly. So every person that we ask to become a volunteer that ends up doing work with us will be vetted multiple ways to ensure that there's no criminal record, especially anything to do with children. But their anonymity regards to the work that they're doing and how they're viewed online will be completely protected within that system. And we will know that, VDI 01 is linked to Tom, and VDI 02 is linked to Scott. And we know that. So we know who is using those because they've been assigned within our internal systems.
Very cool.
So have you consulted with law enforcement to kind of help vet that system? And are they what's their thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, 100%. So when I started this, one of the things that was really important to me before I launched this at DEF CON was that we had initial conversations with law enforcement to first find out is this even possible? Like, if I announce this and do this, am I going to prison? You know,
Right.
what do you need from us in order for us to work with you on this? And what kind of things will make the work that we provide to you acceptable?
Mhm.
And multiple meetings were had with multiple different law enforcement agencies, and we were able to come to conclusions, which kind of became some of our SOPs, about what would be accepted and what would not be accepted, and what kind of things we can and can't do, and how we can and cannot do them. And that became, like I said, our SOPs as to how we'll operate the nonprofit, and then what kind of work we're asking our volunteers to help us with.
Gotcha. Yeah, because it definitely, would come across as like a gray area where I could see law enforcement, maybe, taking a step back and saying, wait a minute, you want to do what? Like, isn't that our job of, because and I know I have friends in law enforcement as well. And, I know this is something that is, really important, from an investigation standpoint. So, do you also see it as, maybe law enforcement just doesn't have the skills or necessarily the technical talent on their end to do the things that your organization is doing?
Well, that's a good question. And what I see from the people that I've spoken to already is they are very skilled,
Mhm.
but there is an issue where one agency we talked to is collecting 3 million images a month that are
Wow.
being traded. There's a couple forums on the dark web that specifically trade in particularly disgusting forms of child porn, and they have hundreds of thousands of members,
Wow.
hundreds of thousands. So the problem is too big. Even with
Mhm.
skilled law enforcement agencies, it's too big,
Yeah.
and America produces 60% of the world's child pornography. So it's
Wow.
a big problem that is being being produced in a country with a large backing and a lot of financial resources. So it's also something that's very difficult to fight.
That's
Yep.
a really interesting statistic, Chris. Do you know, like, is there an organization that sort of looks at the overall statistics like that generates that number 60%?
Yeah, so NCMEC is an interesting that stands for the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children. Um, that is what's funny about NCMEC. I shouldn't say funny. What's interesting about them is they're not a government agency, but they're the only agency in the U.S. that has legal right to store and catalog child pornography once it's found. So if you want to help law enforcement, you basically report the things that you find to that agency,
Mm.
and they are able to produce statistics and look at where these things are coming from, and what areas they're being promoted, where they're being produced, and those different types of things. So you can find these statistics online at different areas, and there's a lot of these like the ICACs throughout the U.S., the Internet Crimes Against Children organizations. They also help produce statistics that help us to see just how big this problem really is.
Yeah, it's great because I mean to have one central organization makes the numbers reliable, right? They're very probably very accurate.
Yeah, it does.
So how can our listeners help, either financially, or if there may be somebody in the hacker community that might be interested in volunteering for your team? How do they engage you?
Yeah, I really appreciate this question, guys. This is going to help. So our website is innocentlivesfoundation.org, and we're asking people uh, for both of the things you mentioned. Right now, we're in a heavy fundraising. We
Mhm.
have so many volunteers, both technical and non-technical. We have so many people that want to help. But one of the things that we decided in the beginning is that even though if people want to volunteer their time, we need to have the ability to offer them contracted positions for X amount of hours to help us with a particular problem.
Mhm.
And the reason is that we we uh, we have to have things like our VDI environment, all of our insurances, all the different technologies we need in place in order to make this work. We have some agreements at working with different groups and organizations to produce some like weekends, like maybe where we get together and try to uncover mass quantities of people at once. And then of course just getting the people involved, all of it takes donations and money right now. So that's a big way people can help. We've done some fundraising, and we're going to be doing more. And what I've been asking people is that if you know those who you think might be interested, they're not in our space, but they may be interested in donating money, or companies that want to add us to donation programs, to reach out through that website. Additionally, we're looking for people who have really, really strong OSINT skills and know also about the dark web to volunteer on the site. And even if you don't have strong OSINT skills, but you have other skills that you think a nonprofit could benefit from, then we ask people to please go to the website and fill out the contact form. And that as we grow and as we get donations and as we have enough funds, we're going to start adding people to the list of those who we can have help us.
That's really good to know. Actually, one quick question on to follow up on that, Chris, is just I know that this episode is probably going to get a lot broader attention than our normal techie followers. So just want to make sure that people understand when they hear the term OSINT that we're talking about what it's open source intelligence, right?
I do that all the time. So I
okay.
use these acronyms, right? I'll say, I'll use these acronyms, like I'll say things like, oh yeah, when we're vishing, and then we'll use some OSINT, and people are like, okay, first of all, back up. What are you talking about?
So we know, but we just want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to understand it.
Yeah, actually, it's a good question that kind of leads to a little bit of a longer answer, which is one of the questions that comes up about the foundation is, are we hacking these people? And the answer is no. So the end game is not any kind of vigilantism. That is definitely not within the realm. I like to be on this side of the prison bars. So there is no vigilantism at all. Our goal is to produce information that law enforcement can use to obtain a warrant. And in order to do that, we need to be able to give them files that contain all legal methods of uncovering. So that means OSINT, which stands for Open Source Intelligence Gathering. We are using only open source tools to link an online anonymous user. So they come and they use their name, user123, and we want to link that guy to Joe Smith on Main Street in Nebraska. And we want to be able to show the law enforcement how that link works and how they can follow the path of OSINT to produce that link, and then they go get the warrant and arrest the guy. So we're not using any kind of hacking methodology in order to do that.
Mm-hmm. And when you say open source, you're looking at any information that's essentially publicly accessible, right? You're not breaking any laws to access it at all.
We're not even, let's say we're on Pastebin and we find that someone posted the username and password for LexisNexis. We're not going to go on and use that because that's illegal, because we do not have LexisNexis has the right to privacy, and they only give usernames and passwords to people who have purchased their product. And since we are not clients of their product, we will not access their product by any means, even unless LexisNexis calls us and says, hey, I want to give you free access to our databases for this project. Great. Now we will gladly use them. But if we do not get free access or paid access, we are not going to be gaining access to databases through any illegal means, even if the data is found through legal means.
I think that's really important for people to know and understand, because it's really the crux of the whole problem, right? Making sure that we're doing it legally.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple websites out there now that do these things, like where they dox people who have been accused of harming children, and then they put all these links out there to their personal life and their personal details, and that's another thing we'll never do. The end of the matter is the law enforcement will need to go get an arrest warrant, collect this person's computer, and verify that on their computer was the housing and trading of child pornography. And until that is done, this person is only alleged at being a bad guy, and it's not proven. So we're not going to be putting, there's no wall of sheep, on our website. The last thing we want is any kind of liability where someone gets lynched or someone gets shot, or someone gets hurt, and all of a sudden they're like, I can't deal with this. This guy in my neighborhood, and then there's like mob action, and it's because we put his name on the website. So that will never be occurring. This is the means of this is to bring legal justice to people who are exploiting children.
Very cool.
Gotcha. Yeah, this is it's amazing work that you're doing, Chris, and you and your team. And No, hopefully our listeners definitely reach out to Innocent Lives Foundation if you're interested in volunteering or getting money. Definitely a worthy cause, and definitely appreciate what you do, Chris.
Thank you.
So kind of switching topics, I know you and your day job, right, which is being a professional social engineer. I wanted to get your take on just kind of what you think kind of the world of social engineering is right now. I know you've been doing a lot with, DerbyCon and DEF CON. There's something that I know you've been a part of called the Social Engineering CTF. And I thought that would be maybe an interesting, if you can give maybe our audience an overview of what that is and what that contest is all about.
Yeah, so we've been running that contest for 8 years, and 8 years ago, when people would ask me that question, I would say, phishing is the #1 vector. Excuse me, and it still is. Phishing, email phishing is still the #1 vector that social engineers use to get into networks and obtain credentials and credit cards and other things like that. So that hasn't changed, but a very close second is vishing. Actually, vishing, that's with a V, so voice phishing, is so prevalent that in 2015 the word got entered into the Oxford Dictionary. So it's now a legit word.
Awesome.
Wow.
And that's what the SECTF is all about. It's about showing through 2 parts, one through OSINT, and open source intelligence, and second part, vishing calls, how dangerous social engineering is. And the way we do it is in a safe environment where we hope and we try to control as much as possible that people don't get victimized. So we have target companies, and the social engineer that competes is given a company, and they are given 3 weeks to do OSINT on that company and produce a report. They're not looking for anything proprietary. They're not looking for passwords or IP addresses or things like that. They're looking for details like, can you find out what OS they use? What kind of antivirus do they use? What kind of company does their dumpsters or vending machines? All these different kinds of things. They look for those things. Okay, and then they write this report. They submit the report. We grade that, and then they come to DEF CON, and this year DerbyCon, and they sit in a big glass booth for 20 minutes, and they make phone calls in front of a packed room, trying to get those same exact flags to the company. And we're not asking them to target a person, so we're not calling like someone's home. We're calling a company, customer service, or call centers, and whatever pretext they're using, they're just trying to get that information out of them in the same exact way they did with the report. And for the last 8 years, basically what we've displayed is that anytime someone gets in the booth, they're generally successful. As long as they've done a good job on research. And this year, hands down, Chris Kirsch proved that. There's a person who does not do social engineering for a living. They do not do vishing for a living. As a matter of fact, last year, when he was a contestant on the SECTF, and I say this with love, he failed miserably. And really bad. And then this year, he came back, and he was determined, that he got in that booth and that failure. He said, I'm never going through that again. So I got 2 choices. I can give up and go hide, or I could try again. And he chose the try again method, and he got in that booth. And I haven't seen things that he did ever. The guy was truly remarkable on the calls, and he doesn't do this for a living.
Yeah, that's cool. I was going to say,
yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say that he must have read one of your books then, Chris, to do better the next year.
I think it was a combination of books, podcasts, sitting in the village. The guy is like one of those people who's like obsessed. So he sat in the village, watches everyone else's calls, observes what other people are doing, practiced, and then came and just totally owned it.
Nice. Yeah, I work with Chris at Veracode, so that's awesome.
So, and right? This is not his natural thing that he does.
No, not his day job at all.
Seeing him get in the booth and producing the kind of work that he did, it was phenomenal. And it was something that, we look at and we're like, wow, okay, this is a person who doesn't do this for a living and proved the point and was able to get almost every flag, literally almost every flag in one phone call. And then duplicate that in a second phone call, and would have if he didn't run out of time.
Wow. It's
That's
really
awesome.
amazing.
I actually just wanted to add something too, Chris. A couple of years ago was given the opportunity to do a social engineering audit myself. My specialty is really security awareness training, and I started doing some phishing assessments. I used to do what I call honey stick drops, where I would drop USB drives and measure how many people would plug them in. But when I got my first chance to do a real social engineering engagement, the first thing I did was I read your social engineering book, and
Thank
it
you.
was actually very helpful. I wasn't able to implement everything, and the one thing that I have to say is it's incredibly hard. If your personality, especially, isn't totally in line with acting or making stuff up on the fly, it is really hard to do what you do.
Yeah, people who are naturally nervous around other people tend to find it difficult, and then social people tend to find it a little bit easier. So I do understand that.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Anyway, I just wanted to let you know I've got a lot of value out of the book, and was happy to be successful on the engagement, but I don't do it very often now. It's just so
And
hard.
if you want to hear something interesting, which I haven't talked about too much publicly yet, is that book that you read, that first book out of my three. I'm rewriting it right now, and the
Oh,
new one
cool.
should be out hopefully in January or February.
Oh,
Yep.
awesome.
Yeah. There's some
Yeah,
great
rewriting
stories in
that
it
with.
too.
Yeah, now I have 7 years more of stories, so this next one
I'm gonna
should
have to
be
buy it
much
again.
much better.
Awesome.
Awesome. So, kind of to wrap things up, what's your advice for our listeners in how they can protect themselves against social engineering attacks?
Well, first you have to be educated, and that could be a hard job, just to kind of state that. I understand how blanket that is, but if you don't know what type of attacks exist, then there's no way you could possibly protect. Right? I constantly sit in front of organizations, and I'll use the word like vishing, and they'll look at me with a blank stare. If you don't know what that is, then how can you possibly protect your people against it?
Mhm.
Right? You have to first be knowledgeable about what kind of attacks are being used and what pretexts are being used. Then once you know that, the second step is much easier, and that's realistic testing. So once you know that, let's say phishing is the biggest vector, then you need to test your people through phishing. And if you don't have a big organization, let's say it's small, then you at least need to keep reading about what types of phishing are being used. So that way you can be aware that, hey, right now probably what's big is IRS scams or charity scams. Right? There's just two massive hurricanes, or three or four massive hurricanes, an earthquake, fires out west. It's just nuts what's going on in the world. So one of the biggest fish right now is charity scams. So being aware of that, you may look twice at a charity email that comes in and make sure that it's legit before you take any action on it. And then thirdly, once you've been educated, you've been tested, now you just need to continue. It's a repetitive process. It's not a one and done. So thinking you can do this maybe once every, quarter, or once every 6 months, or once a year, it's not a good philosophy. This needs to be a continuous, kind of like dieting or working out. You can't
Yep.
do it every now and then. You have to do it continually to see any kind of good benefit.
Absolutely. Also, I just wanted to add here, when I've spoken with a number of clients recently. I'm here in Canada, in Ottawa, and a number of the clients that I work with from a point of view of educating on security awareness is that they're getting vishing and phishing attacks, mostly a lot of them in the area of the financial, like what they called CEO fraud, right? Where somebody impersonates an executive and asks for a transfer of money, or they'll impersonate a supplier and ask for an overdue invoice to be paid. And I'm just wondering, one client I spoke to last week said they're seeing that kind of call or email at least 3 times a day now. Just wondering if that's similar to what you're seeing.
So a lot of times we're talking about phishing right now, or we're talking about vishing.
Well, both actually. So
Yeah. Um,
it-
Once your number's on that list, I tell you, my cell phone number got out there somehow, probably handing out business cards or whatever. And now I'm getting calls from all over the place all the time. And some of them are super scammy, like the ones that's saying they're IRS or they're Microsoft. And then some are just the spam that comes in from marketing. But yes, we're seeing an increase in that because setting up a VoIP server is cheap. It costs nothing.
Mhm.
Right? So you could set that up for a few $100s, and if you're a social engineer, malicious social engineer, think about the payback. So you set up a server for a few $100. You got a bunch of people making calls to random folks, and if you get 1 out of 100 bites, and they pay you $5,000, you just need your money back in a day.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
and there's so many variations
high
on it
profit,
too.
low cost.
Sorry, we had some unusually bad technical difficulties there during recording as I was re-entering the atmosphere. So let's resume where Chris is about to wrap up with his contact info and online resources.
Well, we have our free website, which is social-engineer.org. That contains the podcast, newsletter, framework, blog, a bunch of things that are great for that education piece. From the corporate side, it's social-engineer.com, which is where all of our corporate worky stuff occurs. And then innocentlivesfoundation.org is the foundation. And on there you can find all the different ways of following us on Twitter or Facebook or other things that you can utilize to keep up to date with where we are and what we're doing.
Great. And we'll have all that linked for our audience in the show notes so they can get a hold of you and everything you're working on.
Awesome. I really appreciate it, guys.
All right. Well, thank you for being on the show. Appreciate you discussing everything with us. And
not a problem. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome.
All the best, and welcome back anytime.
Oh, thank you.